A couple of months ago, I was on my way home from work one night. It was around 11 o'clock, and I was exhausted, eagerly anticipating getting home and going to bed. Typically, my drive home took about 20 minutes, give or take. As I exited the highway and drove onto a quieter road, I realized I was less than 10 minutes away from reaching my destination. As I continued driving, I passed by a few businesses and noticed a sidewalk on the right side of the road. At that moment, I was the only car in the vicinity, and I didn't see any others. Ahead of me, I spotted a woman standing on the road, seemingly holding a baby in one arm. As I approached, she began waving frantically, catching my attention. Concerned, I slowed down and eventually stopped my car near her. The woman hurriedly approached my vehicle and asked if I could give her a ride. She explained that she only needed to travel about a mile down the road and that her neighborhood was just beyond. Without much hesitation, I agreed to help her. She willingly got into the back seat of my car, on the passenger side, expressing gratitude and relief that I was willing to assist her. I inquired about her destination, and she assured me it was just up the street. She promised to guide me and inform me when to make the turn. As we drove, I engaged in friendly conversation, asking about the age of her baby. She shared that he was 5 months old and soundly asleep, cradling the child close to her body and gently swaying back and forth. I felt relieved that the baby hadn't awakened during the ride thus far. Despite driving for longer than a mile, I refrained from questioning the woman about the distance. I reasoned that she genuinely needed assistance, and perhaps she had underestimated the actual distance to her home. However, the realization slowly dawned on me that we were getting farther away from my place, and I had missed the opportunity to turn back earlier. When I mentioned to the woman that I might have missed the turn, she assured me that we were still on the right track. Consequently, I continued driving, albeit somewhat annoyed that her initial description of the distance was misleading. It was now clear that her neighborhood was located much farther away. After a few minutes of silence, I glanced back at the woman and her baby through the rearview mirror. To my astonishment, I realized that the baby was not real, it was a lifelike doll. The woman had been holding the doll in a manner that concealed its face and features, explaining why it hadn't made any noise. A rush of unease washed over me as I questioned the woman's intentions and identity. Following the woman's directions, I turned onto the next road, which led to a desolate area with no streetlights. As I drove down the dimly lit road, I noticed in my mirror that the woman had once again positioned the fake baby to face her. It was at this point that my apprehension intensified. The woman directed me to take another right turn, leading us onto a dirt road. The surroundings grew quieter, and my gut feeling grew more ominous. She insisted that her street was nearby, and assured me she would indicate when to stop. As I slowed the car to about 10 miles per hour, we traveled a significant distance down the desolate dirt road. Eventually, the woman instructed me to stop right where we were, claiming it was her destination. She expressed gratitude, opened the car door, and quickly exited. Almost immediately, I heard another noise. An unexpected man emerged from behind a tree on the side of the road. I then noticed another man approaching from the front of my car, emerging from the nearby woods. Realizing the potential danger, I instinctively hit the gas pedal, veering off to the left to execute a U-turn. The woman began shouting, urging someone to get me. As I completed the U-turn, the car door swung shut, narrowly preventing anyone from entering. With the men closing in, I accelerated, honking my horn repeatedly, but they stood their ground, obstructing the road. Desperate to escape, I swerved to the right, maneuvering around them. I ended up driving off the road and onto the grass, successfully evading their grasp. However, in their desperation, the woman struck the left rear side of my car before I sped away. As I distanced myself from the unsettling scene, I dialed the police to report the incident, and then I headed straight home. Reflecting on the harrowing experience, I realized that I had fallen victim to a setup. The incident served as a stark reminder never to pick up hitchhikers again. The encounter had left me shaken, reinforcing the importance of prioritizing personal safety and exercising caution while driving alone at night. A few years ago, something really creepy happened to me. It took place at night when I was driving home. It was pretty late, probably around 11 p.m. or midnight, and most of the roads nearby where I live are really quiet and rural. The areas consist of lots of woods, wildlife, and some farmland as well. As I was driving down one of the roads, I came around a bend and saw what looked like somebody standing on the side of the road. This stretch was pretty much covered in woods on both sides. I immediately felt a little creeped out by this sight. It was a man wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and he had his hand out like he was hitchhiking. I was going about 40 miles per hour, but I had to slow down because the man had one foot in the driving lane I was in. As I got closer, the man actually took a couple of steps out into the road, as if he was trying to stop me. Then he started waving at me. I was suspicious, but I stopped the car. The man walked around to my passenger side window. I wasn't looking to let him inside my car, but I rolled the window down a little to see what he wanted. When I did, the man said that his friend had fallen in the woods and hurt his leg, and he needed help. For whatever reason, the man came off as genuine and concerned about his friend to me. He was kind of pointing into the woods. I asked if he had called the police, and the man said that he got no signal out there. He asked if I could come and help his friend out of the woods. I said yes right away, though I don't really know why I did. In that moment, I believed the man, as stupid as that might sound. I parked my car and got out. The man sort of jogged into the woods and waved me over. I followed him, and soon we entered the dense forest. The man said, "Over here," and kept going further in. I asked him what had happened, but he didn't really answer me. I was just trying my best to keep up with him, as he was walking really quickly. I assumed that his friend was maybe about 20 yards into the woods, but it turned out to be a lot further. We walked through the woods for probably about 5 minutes. Finally, the guy said that his friend was right over there and pointed to a little path that we were on, leading to the right. It wasn't an actual path, but it seemed like one because I could tell that people or animals had walked that way many times. I walked down that path as the man stayed behind me. He said that he thought he had dropped something over there and started looking around on the ground. He said that his friend was about 10 feet down that way. I walked down, expecting to see somebody, but I didn't. I looked all around and called out, asking if anyone was there, but I didn't hear anything. I called out to ask the guy where exactly his friend was, but he didn't answer me. I heard him off in the distance walking around, but I didn't know exactly where he had gone, and it sounded like he was going further away. Now I wasn't sure what to do. I began walking all around and kept asking if anybody was there. After a while, I decided to go find the guy I had been with. I walked in the direction he had gone, but I couldn't find him. I cut through countless tree branches and bushes, but he was nowhere to be found. The woods were pretty dense, and soon I stopped hearing him at all. It was also pitch black in there, and I had to use the flashlight from my phone to see anything. It became very quiet, other than the sound of me. I still called out a few times, asking if anybody was there, but received no answer. Then I decided that I would just head back to my car. The only problem was, I didn't really know where I was anymore. I did my best to think of the direction that I had gone in, and tried to retrace my steps, but I felt like I was just walking around in circles. Eventually, I just picked a direction that I thought the road was in and started walking. But at least 5 minutes went by, and I didn't reach the road. I was getting worried. I went on my phone to possibly call the police or look up the GPS to figure out where I was. But I didn't have a signal. It was never that great around there. As I stood there, looking at my phone screen, I heard something. There was somebody definitely walking in the woods behind me, and they were coming in my direction. I turned around and looked, but then everything became silent. I asked who was there, but got no answer. Then I turned back around and started walking. That's when I heard the noise again. Somebody was walking through the woods behind me. I was really nervous and I sped up. I kept walking through the woods and heard the noises behind me the whole way. The sounds were probably about 30 yards behind or so. I didn't know who it was, but they didn't want me to know who they were. When it sounded like they were getting closer, I started running. I was hoping that I would just reach the end of the woods that seemed to go on forever. Finally, I made it back to the road. I was actually right by my car, and I saw it not too far away. I ran for it and got inside as quickly as possible. I started the car and pulled out of there. It wasn't until I was driving away that I looked behind me. When I did, I saw a man standing just off the road. It was the same guy I had seen before. I was just so happy to be out of there. When I had phone service again, I called the police and told them about the situation. Looking back, it was really strange, and I never should have left my vehicle. When I was younger, I used to hitchhike. Looking back, I can't believe I actually did it. It's extremely dangerous, and people don't do it nearly as much anymore. But back when I used to hitchhike, I felt like I needed to. This was in the 90s, and I didn't have a cell phone, which wasn't as popular back then as it is now. I was broke and trying to travel a few states away, in search of a job. One day, it was late at night, and I had missed a bus that passed through the town I was in. It wasn't a large city, but it had a few stores, restaurants, and other amenities. The city I was trying to reach was about an hour away, so I decided to hitchhike the last part of the journey. I had done it earlier that day, and it went well. I was picked up by a friendly guy, and we had a pleasant conversation. So, I felt confident and not scared or suspicious at all. I walked to one of the roads leading out of the city, knowing that people would be driving in the same direction I wanted to go. It was late at night, around 10 p.m., and the roads were not as busy. I stood on the side of the road, and many cars passed by. As usual, I had to wait for a while, but eventually, a pickup truck slowed down and came to a stop in front of me. I approached the passenger side window and saw a man named Terry sitting in the driver's seat. He greeted me and asked where I was headed. I told him the city's name, and to my relief, he said he was going there too. I felt lucky to have found a ride. I was tired after a long day of travel and knew I would reach my destination in about an hour. I had just enough money to rent a hotel for a couple of nights. As we drove, Terry and I engaged in a brief conversation, but soon I started to doze off. The next thing I remember is waking up feeling dazed and confused. I was still inside the truck, and Terry was driving silently. I realized we were on a quiet road, not the freeway I expected. I questioned Terry about the route, wondering why we weren't on the direct path. Terry didn't provide a clear answer and simply said, there was a detour a little way back. The more we drove, the worse I felt. I noticed that the roads were dark and deserted, a mix of wilderness and occasional houses. Something didn't feel right. I asked Terry how far we were, and he replied that we were almost there. However, my instincts told me otherwise. Eventually, Terry turned the truck onto another road, and I caught a glimpse of a sign that said dead end. Panic set in as I realized we were heading towards a secluded area. I knew I had to get out of there. I reached for the door handle, which was manually locked, and managed to unlock it while Terry looked at me. Seizing the opportunity, I opened the door and jumped out, falling but avoiding any injuries. Quickly getting back on my feet, I ran away from the road, through the grass, and into the nearby woods. I found refuge behind a tree and stayed hidden for a while. After what felt like an eternity, I cautiously left my hiding spot and walked back to the road. I stumbled upon a random person's house and desperately knocked on their front door. Thankfully, they answered and directed me to the nearest gas station, about a mile away. From there, I gathered my bearings and discovered that Terry had driven me past the city he intended to reach. I was only 15 minutes away in a nearby suburb. It became apparent that Terry had likely been taking me to his house. Determined to reach my destination, I made my way there, vowing never to hitchhike again. Looking back, I realize how fortunate I was to escape that situation unharmed. It was a harsh lesson about the dangers of hitchhiking, and I made a promise to myself to prioritize safety and find alternative means of travel in the future.